On a rain-soaked street in Portland, a woman stood frozen under a flickering streetlight, her fear hidden behind silence. She didn't scream, she didn't run, because the man holding her wrist knew exactly how to break someone without leaving marks. What he didn't know was that 10 steps away stood a former police officer who had already lost too much, and a German shepherd who could smell fear before it turned into violence. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Portland was soaked in rain, not the kind that arrives suddenly or violently, but the steady drizzle the city was known for. It clung to the sidewalks, darkened brick walls, and turned streetlights into blurred halos of yellow and orange. Cars moved slower, people walked faster. Everyone seemed eager to get somewhere else. Ethan Crow walked against the current. He didn't carry an umbrella. He never did. The rain dotted his jacket and darkened his shoulders, but he barely noticed. At 42, Ethan was tall and solid, built like someone who once relied on his body for a living. His movements were controlled and efficient, the result of years spent working night patrol. His dark hair was cut short, practical, and his beard was trimmed close, showing a face shaped by sharp lines rather than softness. His eyes were alert, gray-blue, constantly scanning, not nervous, just aware. Ethan had spent nearly 2 decades as a Portland police officer, much of that time working K9. He knew these streets. He knew what usually happened in the spaces people ignored. He also knew what it cost to look away. He no longer wore a badge. That part of his life ended 2 years ago after a call that went wrong enough to take a fellow officer with it. Ethan left the force quietly. No public statements, no farewell ceremony. Some things couldn't be fixed with words. Beside him walked Rook. The German shepherd was 9 years old, large and powerfully built, with a thick sable coat and a graying muzzle. His ears were alert, rotating slightly as they passed through the noise of the city. Rook moved in step with Ethan, close but not touching, his presence calm and steady. They had worked together for years. That bond didn't disappear when the job ended. Burnside Street opened up ahead, busy despite the weather. The night market was active, food carts lined up with steam rising into the rain. Strings of lights hung overhead, creating a warm glow that fought against the cold. Music drifted through the crowd, laughter, the sound of coins exchanging hands. Ethan slowed as he reached the edge of the market. He told himself he was just passing through, that this was habit, nothing more. Still, he adjusted his path so he could see clearly, choosing a spot with open space and easy exits. Old instincts didn't need permission. Rook slowed too. The dog's attention shifted toward a small stall near the center of the market. Ethan followed his gaze. It was a flower stand, simple and narrow, squeezed between a taco cart and a table of used books. Clear plastic sheets protected buckets of fresh flowers from the rain. The colors stood out sharply against the gray night, reds, whites, soft greens. Behind the stall stood a woman arranging stems. She looked to be in her early 30s, average height, slender without looking weak. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled into a loose knot, a few strands falling against pale skin. Her movements were careful and precise, as if she preferred control in small things. She smiled politely at customers, but her shoulders stayed tense, her posture slightly guarded. Her name was Lila Monroe. Ethan didn't know it yet. What he noticed was the way her eyes moved, not wandering, but watching, as if she was always measuring the distance between herself and everyone else. Rook inhaled deeply. The dog's body stiffened just slightly. His tail stayed still, but his focus sharpened. That was when another person stepped into view. The man approached with confidence. He wore a tailored charcoal coat, clean and expensive, and shoes that clearly hadn't been made for wet pavement. His blonde hair was neatly styled, untouched by the rain. He was attractive in a polished way, the kind of man who looked comfortable taking up space. This was Grant Halverson. He leaned against the flower stall, smiling. To most people, it would have looked casual, familiar. Ethan noticed how close he stood, how his body angled inward, limiting space rather than sharing it. Lila noticed him instantly. Her hands paused for half a second before continuing. Her smile returned too quickly. Grant said something low. Lila nodded. His hand moved to her lower back. The gesture looked gentle. It wasn't. Rook let out a quiet sound from his chest. Not a growl. A warning. Ethan stopped walking. He had seen this before, many times. The early signs rarely looked violent. Control came first. Pressure. Quiet corrections that trained a person to comply without protest. Grant picked up a bouquet without asking. He glanced at it, then dropped a few bills on the counter. Not enough. Lila hesitated. Grant leaned closer, his mouth near her ear. Whatever he said ended the hesitation. Lila gathered the bouquet quickly, her movements sharp and rushed. Grant laughed, a short, cutting sound, and took the flowers. His fingers closed around her wrist for a brief moment. Lila flinched, barely, enough that most people wouldn't notice. Ethan did. Something tightened in his chest. Not anger, recognition. Rook inhaled again. Ethan knew the scent the dog was reacting to. Fear had a smell. Rook had learned it in training long before Ethan learned to trust it. Grant turned and started walking away, pulling Lila with him. She stumbled slightly, then matched his pace, head lowered. Ethan shifted his stance, placing himself where he could still see them. His hand rested lightly on Rook's collar, not holding him back, just grounding them both. He reminded himself that he wasn't a cop anymore, that he had no authority, no obligation. The reminder didn't change anything. The rain continued to fall. The market buzzed around them, unaware. People laughed, ate, moved on. Grant and Lila disappeared toward the edge of the crowd. Ethan didn't follow, not yet. Chapter 1 didn't need action. It needed attention. Rook sat at his side, eyes fixed on the direction they had gone. Portland kept raining, and Ethan kept watching. The rain followed them out of the market, not in sheets, not loudly, but in the same quiet persistence that seemed to define Portland itself. Ethan Crow kept his distance, far enough to blend into the flow of people leaving Burnside Street, close enough that he never lost sight of them. Grant Halverson walked ahead with long, confident strides, one hand gripping Lila Monroe's wrist just above the bone. Lila matched his pace, half a step behind, her head slightly lowered, shoulders tight. To anyone else, they might have looked like a couple eager to escape the rain. To Ethan, the imbalance was unmistakable. Rook moved beside him, silent, as focused. The German shepherd's ears stayed forward, his body loose but ready. Years ago, Ethan had taught him how to track suspects through alleys and crowds. Tonight, Rook didn't need commands. He followed intent as much as scent. They reached the edge of the market where the lights thinned and the city grew quieter. The sounds of laughter and music faded, replaced by the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the low hum of traffic along the bridge. Grant stopped near a row of parked cars and turned sharply toward Lila. He spoke again, this time louder. Ethan still couldn't make out the words, but he saw the reaction. Lila flinched. Her free hand tightened around the strap of her bag as if it were the only solid thing keeping her upright. Grant's face hardened. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His control showed in the way he leaned closer, forcing Lila to step back until her heel caught on the curb. She steadied herself quickly, eyes darting around, checking who might be watching. Ethan slowed. This was the moment he knew too well, the edge where things tipped from quiet pressure into something worse. He had responded to scenes like this dozens of times during his career. The difference now was that he stood there without a radio, without backup, without legal cover. He was a private citizen watching something. That wasn't technically a crime yet. Rook felt the shift. His muscles tightened, nails scraping softly against the pavement. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warmth of him, the steady strength. "Easy," he murmured. Grant suddenly shoved Lila's shoulder, not hard enough to send her down, but hard enough to make a point. She stumbled, catching herself against the side of a sedan. Her breath came fast, shallow. That was enough. Ethan stepped forward. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He closed the distance at a calm, deliberate pace, placing himself just close enough to be noticed. Rook moved with him, stopping at his left side, posture tall and alert. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan asked. Grant turned, surprised, irritation flashing across his face. Up close, Ethan could see the man clearly. Grant was in his late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven. His jaw was strong, his features sharp, but there was something brittle beneath the polish. His eyes flicked briefly to Rook, then back to Ethan, calculating. "No," Grant said quickly, tightening his grip on Lila's wrist. "This is private." Lila said nothing. She stared at the ground, rain soaking into the hem of her coat. Ethan met Grant's gaze. Years in uniform had taught him how to hold eye contact without challenging, without yielding. Didn't look private from where I was standing. Grant's mouth curved into a thin smile. Mind your business. Rook let out a low, controlled growl. Grant stiffened. Control your dog. He is, Ethan replied. His voice was even. He reacts to threats. Grant scoffed, but his grip loosened just a fraction. Lila pulled her arm back quickly, rubbing her wrist. The skin there was already reddening. Before Ethan could say anything more, headlights swept across the lot. A patrol car rolled slowly toward them, tires hissing on wet pavement. Grant's posture changed instantly. His shoulders relaxed, his expression softened. He took a step closer to Lila again, draping an arm around her in what now looked convincingly protective. The car stopped. 2 officers stepped out. The first was Officer Daniel Reyes, mid-40s, average height, with a stocky build and a tired face lined by years of night shifts. His dark hair was cropped short, and a trimmed mustache framed a mouth that rarely smiled on duty. The second was Officer Kim Patterson, younger, leaner, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back under her cap. She moved with alert efficiency, hand resting near her belt. Reyes took in the scene quickly. "Everything all right here?" Grant answered before anyone else could. "Yes, officer. Just a misunderstanding. My wife tripped." Lila hesitated. Ethan watched her carefully. He saw the calculation behind her eyes. The quick assessment of risk, consequence, survival. He had seen it before, too many times. Victims learned early that truth didn't always protect them. "Yes," Lila said, quietly. "I'm fine." Reyes nodded, his gaze lingering on her wrist, on the tension in her shoulders. "You sure?" She nodded again, more firmly this time. Grant smiled, grateful and triumphant all at once. Reyes turned to Ethan. "Sir, you need to move along." Ethan considered his options. He could argue. He could explain what he had seen. He could push. None of it would help Lila tonight. He knew that too. "Understood," he said. He stepped back, giving them space. Rook followed, though his eyes never left Grant. Patterson watched the dog closely, then gave Ethan a brief nod of acknowledgement. She had seen enough to be wary, not enough to act. The officers waited until Grant guided Lila toward his car before returning to their patrol vehicle. Ethan stood in the rain, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. He told himself it wasn't over. Grant helped Lila into the passenger seat of a black sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. He closed the door with unnecessary force, then walked around to the driver's side. Before getting in, he glanced back. His eyes met Ethan's. There was no fear there, only promise. The sedan pulled away, taillights fading into the wet street. Rook exhaled slowly. Ethan stayed where he was for a long moment, rain soaking through his jacket. He felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not guilt, responsibility. The kind that didn't disappear just because the law said it should. "Come on," he said finally. They turned back toward the sidewalk, heading in the opposite direction. Ethan didn't follow the car, not tonight. Instead, he pulled a folded receipt from his pocket, smoothing it carefully. On the back, he wrote his phone number and a single word: call. He didn't know yet how he would give it to her, only that he would. Some lines were crossed quietly, others demanded time. Ethan walked on, the rain still falling, the city still watching. Morning in Portland arrived without ceremony. The rain had eased into a thin mist that clung to everything it touched, leaving the city washed, but not clean. Ethan Crow sat in his truck across from a small corner cafe, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. He hadn't slept much. He rarely did after nights like the one before. Rook lay on the passenger seat, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. Even at rest, the German Shepherd never fully disconnected. His coat was still damp along the spine, and when Ethan reached over to scratch behind his ears, Rook leaned into the touch, steady and familiar. 9 years old, still strong, still sharp. The gray at his muzzle made him look older than he was, but his posture carried the confidence of a dog who had learned his place in the world. Ethan checked the time, just after 8. The night market wouldn't reopen until evening, but Ethan wasn't there for the crowd. He wanted the quiet, the hours when routines were visible and people showed who they were without an audience. He drove slowly toward Burnside, parking a block away from where the flower stall usually stood. The street looked different in daylight, less forgiving. Cracks in the sidewalk showed more clearly. The graffiti seemed harsher without the cover of neon and shadows. The flower stall was already there. Lila Monroe stood behind it, tying bundles of greenery with thin twine. She wore a dark sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back tighter than the night before. Her face looked paler in the morning light, and there was a faint shadow beneath her eyes. She worked with focus, but her shoulders remained tense, as if she were bracing for interruption. Ethan didn't approach immediately. He crossed the street and leaned against a lamppost, pretending to check his phone while watching her reflection in the glass of a nearby storefront. He wasn't sure what he would say. He only knew he couldn't leave without trying. A man approached the stall, older, with a graying beard and a knit cap pulled low. He picked up a small bundle of flowers, asked a question, paid, and left. Lila smiled politely, then exhaled once he was gone. Ethan took that as his moment. He walked over at an unhurried pace, stopping a few feet from the stall. Rook stayed at his side, calm and quiet. "Morning," Ethan said. Lila looked up. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something more guarded. She nodded. "Morning. I didn't mean to cause trouble last night," Ethan said. He kept his voice low, neutral. "I just wanted to check that you were all right." She hesitated. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the street, then back to him. "I'm fine." The words came too quickly. Ethan nodded. "I understand." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded receipt. He placed it on the edge of the stall, careful not to push it toward her. "If that ever changes..." Lila stared at the paper. For a long second, she didn't move. Then she slid it beneath a stack of paper bags with practiced ease. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan didn't linger. He nodded once and stepped back, giving her space. Rook followed without a sound. As they walked away, Ethan felt the tension ease slightly from his chest. It wasn't resolution. It was a start. They didn't get far before a voice called out, "Hey, nice dog." Ethan turned. A man stood near the used book table a few yards away. He was in his early 60s, tall but stooped, with a long gray beard and deep lines etched into his face. He wore a heavy coat that looked older than both of them, patched at the elbows, and fingerless gloves despite the mild morning. His eyes were sharp, curious, and not unkind. "Name's Walter Briggs," the man said. "I sell books, or try to." Ethan nodded. "Ethan, this is Rook." Walter crouched slowly, careful not to startle the dog. Rook watched him calmly, tail still. Walter smiled. "He's seen things." "Yeah," Ethan said. "So have you." Walter chuckled. "Enough." He straightened, glancing back toward the flower stall. "You're the guy from last night." Ethan didn't deny it. Walter's expression shifted, growing more serious. "That woman. She's here most mornings, doesn't talk much. That man comes around sometimes. Always leaves the air colder." Ethan studied him. "You ever seen him hurt her?" Walter shook his head. "Not where people could see." He paused. "But I've lived long enough to recognize fear when it stands still." Ethan nodded. "If you notice anything," he said, "anything at all, I'll remember," Walter said. "That's all any of us can do sometimes." Ethan thanked him and walked on. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ethan worked a short shift at the warehouse loading supplies, keeping to himself. His coworkers were polite but distant. Most knew he was former law enforcement. Some respected it, others didn't trust it. Ethan didn't mind either way. By evening, the rain returned. Burnside Street came alive again, lights flickering on, crowds forming. Ethan took his usual position near the edge, watching without being seen. Rook sat beside him, ears moving, body relaxed. Lila arrived just before dusk, setting up her stall with practiced efficiency. She worked quickly, glancing around more often than she had in the morning. Grant appeared half an hour later. Ethan felt it before he saw him, the shift in energy, the way Lila's hands stilled. Grant wore a dark coat, collar turned up, his hair damp from the rain. He smiled when he reached the stall, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. He leaned in close, speaking softly. Lila nodded, eyes lowered. Ethan watched for several minutes, noting details. Grant's hand rested on the stall this time, not on her. His voice remained low. Control without display. Then Grant's gaze lifted. He spotted Ethan instantly. Their eyes met. Grant's expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind it. He said something to Lila, then turned and walked away without buying anything. Lila's shoulders sagged the moment he left. She steadied herself against the stall, breathing slowly. Ethan didn't approach again. Not tonight. He had already made his move. Now he needed patience. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan noticed Lila closing up early. She packed the flowers quickly, hands shaking slightly. When she finished, she hesitated, then looked around. Her eyes found Ethan. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She nodded once. Ethan nodded back. It was small, barely anything, but it mattered. He watched her walk away, disappearing into the wet streets of Portland, and felt the familiar weight settle in his chest again. This time, it wasn't helplessness. It was resolve. Rook shifted beside him, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg. "I know," Ethan murmured. The lights dimmed, the rain fell, and the city once again pretended not to notice. The rain returned with purpose that night, heavier than before, loud enough to flatten sound and shrink the city into narrow corridors of light. Ethan Crow was home, a modest second-floor apartment above a closed hardware store on Division Street, when his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. He hadn't turned on the television. He rarely did. The quiet suited him, and Rook lay stretched across the worn rug by the window, head lifted, ears twitching at every passing car. The phone vibrated again. Ethan glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He didn't hesitate. He never did when the call came late. "This is Ethan," he said. For a moment, there was only breathing on the other end, shallow, uneven, like someone trying to stay quiet while failing at it. "It's me," a woman whispered. "From the flowers. Lila." Ethan straightened, every sense sharpening at once. "Where are you?" "My apartment," she said. I shouldn't have called. I'm sorry." Rook was already on his feet. "Lila," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady, measured. "Listen to me. Are you alone?" "No." Her breath hitched. "He's here." The word didn't need explanation. Ethan crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, reaching for his jacket. "Is he hurt? Is he drinking?" "Yes," she said. "He's angry." A sharp sound cut through the line, something breaking, followed by a muffled curse in a man's voice. Lila gasped. "He found the paper." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. That was all he allowed himself. "Where exactly are you in the apartment?" "The bathroom," she whispered. "I locked the door." "Good," Ethan said. "Stay there. Put your phone on silent. If you can, get into the tub. Keep low." "He's saying things," she said, voice trembling. "He says I embarrassed him, that I made him look weak." "That's not on you," Ethan said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Another crash. Closer. Ethan was already pulling on his boots. Rook stood at the door, body tense, tail low, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Lila," Ethan said. "What's the address?" She gave it to him between breaths. "I'm on my way," he said. "Stay with me as long as you can." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone for a brief moment, then slid it into his pocket. He clipped Rook's leash on, though he doubted he'd need it, and they were out the door within seconds. The drive was short, but felt longer. Rain blurred the windshield despite the wipers working at full speed. Ethan kept his speed controlled, his mind running through possibilities. He didn't carry a weapon. He wasn't law enforcement anymore. None of that mattered. Lila's building was a 3-story walk-up near the river, concrete and brick, the kind of place that had seen better decades. Ethan parked down the block, cutting the engine and lights. He listened for a moment. The rain covered most sounds, but he heard shouting, muffled, distorted by walls. He didn't rush the entrance. He circled first, checking sightlines, noting which windows were lit. Rook moved beside him, silent, alert. They reached the rear of the building, where a narrow alley ran alongside a rusted fire escape. A light flickered on the second floor. That would be her unit. Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time, keeping his steps controlled. He stopped outside the apartment door. From inside, Grant's voice was clear now, sharp, venomous, paced by the sound of movement. "You think you can make a fool of me?" Grant snapped. "You think people don't notice?" Ethan knocked once, firm, controlled. The shouting stopped. There was a pause, heavy and charged. Then the door jerked open. Grant Halverson stood there, eyes wide with surprise before hardening into anger. Up close, the man looked different than he had in public. His hair was disheveled, his face flushed. A short beard shadowed his jaw now, uneven, the kind grown in neglect rather than style. He smelled of alcohol and sweat. "What are you doing here?" Grant demanded. Ethan didn't raise his voice. "I'm here to check on her." Grant laughed, sharp and ugly. "This again? You really don't know when to stop." Rook stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Ethan, head level with Grant's thigh. His lips lifted just enough to show teeth. No sound, no movement beyond that. Grant's eyes flicked down Masim. Fear flashed there, quick and unguarded. "Get that dog away from me." "You need to step back," Ethan said, "and let her come out." Grant's jaw clenched. "She's my partner. This is none of your business." A sound came from inside the apartment, a sob, quickly stifled. That was the line. Ethan moved. He didn't strike. He stepped into Grant's space, controlling the man's center of balance with a firm grip on his coat, using leverage rather than force. Grant swung wildly, uncoordinated. Ethan redirected the blow, twisting Grant's arm just enough to bring him down to one knee. Rook barked once, deep and loud, the sound filling the narrow hallway. "Enough," Ethan said. Grant struggled, cursing, but the fight drained out of him as quickly as it had arrived. Ethan released him and stepped back. "Stay down," he said. Grant stayed where he was, breathing hard, staring at Rook. Ethan turned toward the bathroom door. "Lila, it's Ethan. You can come out." The door opened slowly. Lila stepped into the hall, wrapped in a thin robe, hair loose and tangled. Her face was pale, eyes red, but she was standing. She looked at Grant, then at Ethan. "Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" Ethan asked. She nodded, swallowing hard. "My sister's across town." "Good," he said. "Pack what you need. We'll go now." Grant laughed weakly from the floor. "You think this is over?" Ethan didn't look at him. "Yes." They didn't wait for the police, not tonight. Ethan knew how these calls ended too often. Instead, he helped Lila gather essentials quickly. Clothes, documents, her phone charger, nothing more. They left through the back stairwell, rain swallowing them as they stepped outside. Ethan drove with Lila in the passenger seat and Rook in the back, silent and watchful. Her sister's house was small, warm, lit by a single porch light. Maya Reynolds, Lila's sister, opened the door immediately. She was in her late 30s, shorter than Lila, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and tired eyes that sharpened instantly when she saw her sister's face. "What happened?" Maya asked. "Later," Lila said, her voice breaking. Maya pulled her into a hug without another word. Ethan stayed only long enough to make sure Lila was inside and safe. As he turned to leave, Lila stepped forward. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." Ethan nodded. "You did the hard part. You called." On the drive home, Rook rested his head against the seat, eyes half closed. Ethan kept his hands steady on the wheel. He knew this wasn't finished, but something had shifted. The call had been answered. The rain eased by morning, leaving the city damp and quiet, as if Portland itself were holding its breath. Ethan Crow parked across the street from Maya Reynolds' house and sat for a moment with the engine off. The windows were fogged, the smell of wet wool and old leather filling the cab. Rook lay curled on the back seat, eyes open, watching the house through the glass. He hadn't slept much either. Dogs remembered tension in their bodies long after it left the room. Ethan checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. That didn't mean much. Silence could be a warning, as easily as it could be relief. He stepped out into the cool air and crossed the street. The house was modest, single-story, pale siding, a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. It looked lived in, protected by routine rather than locks. Maya answered the door before he knocked. She was shorter than her sister, sturdier in build, with dark hair pulled into a loose bun that showed streaks of gray at the temples. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested years of working too hard and sleeping too little. Her expression was cautious but grateful. "She's asleep," Maya said quietly. "Finally." Ethan nodded. "Good." Maya stepped aside to let him in. The house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. A blanket was folded neatly on the couch. On the coffee table sat Lila's phone, charging. "She didn't say much," Maya continued, "just that she needed to get out. I didn't push." "That was the right call," Ethan said. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Maya folded her arms, studying him. "He's not done," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Ethan agreed. "He won't be." Maya's jaw tightened. "What happens now?" Ethan thought carefully before answering. He had learned the cost of giving false certainty. "Now we slow things down. We make choices that leave a record." Maya nodded. "I can take her to file a report." Ethan met her gaze. "If she's ready, it has to be her decision." Maya sighed. "I know." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ethan glanced toward the stairs instinctively, then relaxed when Lila appeared at the top, wrapped in a sweater that hung too large on her frame. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, but there was a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I heard voices," she said softly. Ethan took a step back, giving her space. "I was just checking in." "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, unadorned, but they held weight. Maya poured coffee and handed Lila a mug. Lila wrapped both hands around it, as if anchoring herself. "I want to file a report," she said after a moment. Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't stop. "Not for last night, for everything." Ethan nodded. "That's a good place to start." They drove together to the precinct later that morning. Ethan followed in his truck, keeping distance, watching mirrors. Rook sat upright in the back, posture alert. Inside the station, the air felt stale and bright under fluorescent lights. Officer Kim Patterson spotted them almost immediately and approached with measured steps. Up close, she looked younger than Ethan remembered, her features sharp, her expression serious without being cold. "I can help," Kim said, her voice low. "We'll take this slowly." They were taken to a small interview room. Lila sat across from Kim, hands clasped, shoulders drawn tight. Maya sat beside her, a steady presence. Ethan remained near the door, quiet. The statement took time. Details emerged in fragments. Words hesitated, then found their way out. Control. Isolation. Threats disguised as concern. Kim listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily. When Lila faltered, Kim waited. By the end, Lila looked drained but lighter, as if something heavy had been set down. "We'll request a temporary protective order today," Kim said. "Given the circumstances, it should be granted quickly." "And if he violates it?" Maya asked. Kim's jaw tightened. "Then we act." Ethan knew it wouldn't be that simple. Orders were paper. Enforcement depended on timing. Grant Halverson didn't wait long. That afternoon, Ethan was back at his apartment when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No greeting, just an address and a time. Underneath it, a single sentence. "You think you won." Ethan stared at the screen. He deleted the message, then saved the number separately. He didn't respond. Rook lifted his head, ears pricked. "I know," Ethan murmured. He didn't go to the address. He knew better. Instead, he drove to a small office building near the river where a brass plaque by the door read, "Marion Wells, Victim Advocacy Services." Marion Wells was in her late 50s, tall and thin, with silver hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a blazer over a plain blouse, the sleeves rolled up. Her handshake was firm. "I was expecting you," she said, gesturing for him to sit. Kim called. Ethan explained the situation, sticking to facts. Marion listened, nodding occasionally. "Grant Halverson," she said when he finished. "I know the type." She pulled a file from her desk. "He's been careful. No convictions. A few complaints that went nowhere. Partners who decided it was easier to disappear." Ethan leaned back. "He won't disappear this time." Marion's expression softened. "That depends on what we do next." They discussed safety plans, patterns, escalation. Marion spoke plainly, without drama. She had seen this too often to waste time on optimism. "He may try to intimidate you," she said. "He may try to charm others. Stay predictable. Keep records. And don't underestimate patience. Men like him believe time is on their side." That evening, Ethan returned home to find his door ajar. He froze, every muscle tightening. Rook stepped forward first, body low, silent. Ethan pushed the door open slowly. The apartment was intact, but disturbed. A drawer pulled out, papers scattered on the table, nothing taken. On the counter lay a single object. The folded receipt Ethan had given Lila, now smoothed flat. Ethan's jaw tightened. Grant had been there, not to steal, to send a message. Ethan picked up the paper and placed it carefully in his pocket. He took photos of the apartment, then called Kim. Within minutes, Officer Daniel Reyes arrived. He surveyed the scene with a tired sigh. "He's pushing boundaries," Reyes said, "seeing what he can get away with." "And you?" Ethan asked. Reyes met his gaze. "I'm documenting everything." Later, as the night settled in, Ethan sat on the floor with Rook, his back against the couch. Rook leaned into him, solid and warm. "This doesn't end quickly," Ethan said quietly. Rook's tail thumped once. Ethan knew Grant would escalate. He also knew something else had changed. Lila had spoken. The door had closed behind her. That mattered. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the city washed raw and unsettled. Portland looked different without the constant motion of water. Its streets too exposed, its silence uneasy. Ethan Crow stood on the small balcony outside his apartment, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. He hadn't slept. He rarely did once a line had been crossed. Inside, Rook lay near the door, body stretched but alert, amber eyes following every shift in Ethan's posture. The German Shepherd's coat caught the early light, dark along the spine, lighter at the flanks, the gray around his muzzle more pronounced than it had been a year ago. At 9, Rook moved a little slower in the mornings, but his awareness never dulled. He had learned long ago that danger often came quietly. Ethan replayed the night before in his mind, the open door, the scattered papers, the receipt left in plain sight. Grant Halverson hadn't been searching for anything. He had been marking territory. Ethan knew the type. He'd arrested men like Grant when he still wore a badge, men who believed control was proof of strength and that intimidation was a language everyone understood. The problem was that Grant was careful. Careful men lasted longer. Ethan stepped back inside, locking the balcony door behind him. He checked his phone again. No new messages. That, too, meant very little. Later that morning, he drove across town to a low industrial area near the river, where rows of warehouses backed up against a stretch of neglected train tracks. This was where he worked now, loading freight, keeping his head down, blending in. The job paid enough. It kept him busy. It didn't ask questions. His supervisor, Caleb Moore, was already there, clipboard tucked under one arm. Caleb was in his early 50s, broad through the shoulders, with a shaved head and a permanent scowl that softened only when he talked about his motorcycle. A former dock worker, he moved with the stiffness of someone whose body had paid its dues. "You're early," Caleb said, glancing at the clock. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan replied. Caleb grunted. "Happens." The shift passed without incident. Ethan worked steadily, stacking pallets, checking manifests, his body moving on autopilot while his mind stayed alert. Rook waited in the truck, a setup Caleb tolerated without comment. Most people did, once they saw the dog. It was just after lunch when Ethan noticed the black sedan parked across the street, Grant's car. Ethan didn't react outwardly. He finished loading a crate, signed off on a delivery, then wiped his hands on a rag. When he looked again, the sedan was still there, engine running. Grant stepped out. In daylight, Grant looked composed again. His hair was neatly styled, his coat pressed, his face calm. The short beard he'd worn the night before was gone, replaced by a clean shave that sharpened his jawline. He walked toward the warehouse with measured steps, hands visible, posture open. Anyone watching would have seen confidence, not threat. Caleb noticed him too. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "No," Ethan said. Grant stopped a few feet away, smile in place. "Ethan, we need to talk." Caleb's eyes flicked between them. Ethan met his gaze. "I've got it." Caleb hesitated, then nodded and walked off, though he didn't go far. Grant glanced around, taking in the warehouse, the forklifts, the workers. "You've been busy," he said lightly. "Didn't picture you in a place like this." Ethan crossed his arms. "You shouldn't be here." Grant smiled wider. "You shouldn't be involving yourself in other people's relationships." Ethan kept his voice level. "She asked for help." Grant's expression tightened for just a moment before smoothing out again. "She's confused. That happens when outsiders interfere." Ethan took a step closer. "You broke into my apartment," Grant shrugged. "Door was unlocked." "That wasn't a conversation," Ethan said. "That was a threat." Grant's smile vanished. His eyes hardened, something cold settling there. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said quietly. "Walk away. Let this go back to where it belongs." Ethan didn't raise his voice. "It doesn't belong anywhere near her." For a moment, Grant looked like he might say more. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I tried." He turned and walked back to his car. Ethan didn't follow him. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered both ways. That afternoon, Ethan received a call from Marion Wells. "He's pushing," she said. "We expected that. Lila's protective order came through this morning." "That won't stop him," Ethan replied. "No," Marion agreed, "but it gives us leverage, and it gives her choices." Ethan drove to Maya's house that evening to check on Lila. She met him at the door, her posture straighter than before, though tension still lived in her shoulders. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, hair pulled back simply. There was a faint bruise along her forearm, yellowing now, no longer fresh. "He's been calling," she said as they sat at the kitchen table. "From different numbers. I haven't answered." "That's good," Ethan said. "Keep everything. Messages, missed calls, all of it." Maya brought tea, setting the cups down with deliberate care. She watched Ethan closely. "He came by here earlier," she said. Ethan looked up. "When?" "Midday. I wasn't home. Neighbor saw him sitting in his car across the street." Lila's hands tightened around her cup. Ethan felt the familiar pressure build behind his eyes. "Did he leave?" "Yes," Maya said. "After a while." "That's escalation," Ethan said quietly. "He's testing boundaries." That night, Ethan didn't go straight home. He drove the long way, circling familiar streets, checking reflections, making sure he wasn't being followed. Only when he was satisfied did he park and walk inside with Rook close at his side. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Rook stopped just inside the door, body stiffening. His ears angled forward, nose lifting. Ethan followed his gaze. The living room window was open. Ethan hadn't left it that way. He moved slowly, scanning the room. Nothing else was disturbed. No drawers pulled out. No objects moved. Just the open window, rain-scented air drifting in. On the windowsill sat a small object, a key. Ethan recognized it immediately. It was the spare key Lila had once kept hidden above her doorframe, the one she thought Grant didn't know about. Grant was reminding them both that he paid attention. Ethan closed the window and locked it, then sat heavily on the couch. Rook came to him, pressing his head against Ethan's knee, steady and grounding. "This is where it changes," Ethan said softly. He didn't mean violence. He meant resolve. He called Kim Patterson and reported the incident. He forwarded screenshots of the messages. He documented everything. Paper trails mattered. Later, as the night deepened, Ethan sat with Rook at his feet, going over safety plans again in his head. Lila couldn't stay hidden forever. Grant wouldn't stop on his own. The law would move, but it would move slowly. Ethan knew something else too. Grant was growing impatient. And impatient men made mistakes. The first mistake Grant Halverson made was impatience. It showed in the way he began to move too quickly, too openly, as if time itself had started to press against him. Men like Grant relied on control, and control required distance. When that distance closed, when pressure built without release, precision gave way to urgency. Ethan Crow recognized the shift the same way he recognized changes in weather. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. It began with a phone call. Ethan was in his truck, parked a block from Maya Reynolds' house, the engine idling low. It had become routine over the past few days. Quiet checks, irregular timing, no pattern that could be tracked. Rook sat upright in the back seat, ears rotating, eyes steady. The dog was calmer here than at Ethan's apartment. He sensed fewer unknowns. The call came from Kim Patterson. "He missed," Kim said without preamble. Ethan straightened. "Missed what?" "Grant filed a complaint this morning," she said. "Claims you threatened him at his workplace." Ethan exhaled slowly. And he overplayed it," Kim replied. "Security footage shows he approached you. We have witnesses. The complaint won't stick." "That won't stop him," Ethan said. "No," Kim agreed, "but it tells us something." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "He's trying to flip the narrative. And he's running out of room," Kim added, "which makes him dangerous." They ended the call. Ethan stayed where he was, watching the quiet street. The houses here were close together, their windows glowing softly against the dark. Normal lives, predictable routines. Grant's presence would be an intrusion anywhere. That mattered. Rook shifted, letting out a low breath. Ethan glanced at the side mirror. A vehicle had slowed at the corner. It wasn't Grant's sedan. This one was older, a dark SUV with a dull finish, the kind designed to blend rather than impress. It paused, too long, then continued on. Ethan memorized it anyway. Later that night, Maya called. "He was here," she said, voice tight. "Not Grant. Someone else." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Describe him." "Late 30s, maybe early 40s, Maya said. "Tall, but not bulky. Beard. He didn't come up to the door, just stood across the street talking on his phone." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Grant had outsourced. "Did he see Lila?" Ethan asked. "No. I closed the blinds as soon as I noticed him." "That was the right move," Ethan said. "Call me if he comes back." After the call, Ethan drove. Not fast, not directly. He looped the neighborhood, watching for the SUV. He didn't see it again, but absence didn't mean safety. It meant waiting. The man returned the next night. Ethan saw him first. The SUV was parked farther down the street this time, half hidden beneath a tree. The driver sat still, engine off. Ethan watched from his own vehicle, heart rate steady. Rook stiffened, recognizing the tension. Ethan stepped out and crossed the street slowly, hands visible. The man noticed him immediately and stepped out of the SUV. Up close, Ethan could see him clearly. He was tall, lean, with long arms and narrow shoulders. His beard was thick but unkempt, streaked with gray that suggested stress more than age. His eyes were pale and restless, scanning constantly. He wore a hooded jacket and work boots scuffed at the toes. This was Marcus Vale. Marcus didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. "You lost?" Marcus asked. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "This isn't a good place to wait," and Marcus smirked. "I'm allowed to park." "You're allowed to leave too," Ethan said. Marcus studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Just doing a favor." "For who?" Marcus smiled thinly. "You already know." Ethan nodded. "Then you should tell him to stop." Marcus's smile faded. "You think I answer to him?" "I think you're being paid," Ethan replied. "And I think you don't want this job anymore." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't know what I want." Ethan stepped closer. "I know you don't want charges, or a dog like him deciding you're a problem." Rook stood just behind Ethan, head high, eyes locked on Marcus. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't need to. Marcus took a step back, then another. "Tell Grant he's done," Ethan said. "Next time, it won't be a conversation." Marcus hesitated, then laughed quietly, more nervous than amused. "You're serious?" "Yes," Ethan said. Marcus got back into the SUV and drove off without another word. Ethan waited until the vehicle disappeared before returning to his truck. His hands were steady. His pulse was not. Grant had escalated again. This time, through someone else. That mattered. The next morning, Marion Wells called. "He contacted a private security firm," she said. "Not a good one. One of those gray area outfits." "That was him," Ethan said. Marion sighed. "I've updated Kim. We're moving faster now." That afternoon, Lila asked to meet Ethan. They sat on a park bench near the river, Rook lying at Ethan's feet, content to watch ducks drift along the water. Lila looked stronger than she had a week ago. Still tired, still careful, but present. She wore a jacket that fit properly, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder. "He won't stop, will he?" she asked. "No," Ethan said. "Not on his own." She nodded, accepting the truth. "I don't want to hide forever." "You won't," Ethan replied. "But the next part is harder. You have to let him make the mistake." She looked at him. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that leaves evidence," Ethan said. That night, Grant made his move. Ethan was back at his apartment, lights off, sitting quietly with Rook. The city outside was calm, almost deceptively so. He'd already reported Marcus's visit. He'd already documented everything. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text message, no number displayed. "I'm done waiting." Ethan stood. The sound came seconds later, a sharp crack against the door. Not a knock, a kick. Rook surged forward, barking once, loud and deep. The door splintered on the second impact. Grant forced his way inside, eyes wild, breath ragged. He wasn't alone. Marcus followed him in, slower this time, hesitation clear on his face. This was Grant's second mistake. He hadn't planned for witnesses. Ethan moved quickly, not violently. He grabbed Grant's arm, twisting it just enough to force him off balance. Rook blocked Marcus, snapping the air inches from his forearm. Marcus froze. Sirens cut through the night. Grant screamed something incoherent as he hit the floor. The police arrived within minutes. This time, there was no story Grant could tell that fit the scene. As they took him away, Grant looked at Ethan. Rage finally replaced by fear. Ethan watched without satisfaction. Some lessons came late, some came all at once. The morning after Grant Halverson was taken into custody arrived quietly. There were no headlines, no cameras waiting outside the precinct, no sudden sense of triumph. Portland woke the way it always did. Slowly, under a sky the color of damp paper, the air smelling faintly of rain and river water. Ethan Crow noticed the quiet more than usual. After weeks of tension, of listening for footsteps and engines and voices where they shouldn't be, the absence of threat felt almost unreal. He stood in his kitchen with a mug of coffee, staring out the window as traffic began to move along Division Street. Rook lay nearby, stretched out on the cool floor, his breathing deep and steady. At 9 years old, the German Shepherd had earned his rest. His coat still carried the marks of age, gray along the muzzle, stiffness in his hips when he first rose. But his eyes remained sharp, alert in a softer way now. The work was done. He seemed to know it. Ethan's phone buzzed once on the counter. Kim Patterson. "They're holding him," she said. Her voice sounded tired but satisfied. Breaking and entering, violation of the protective order, conspiracy, and Marcus flipped. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Good. "He won't be out anytime soon," Kim added. "Not with this much on record." "That's all anyone can ask for," Ethan replied. After the call, Ethan sat down at the small table by the window. He didn't rush to move on. He had learned that endings, real ones, took time to settle. 2 days later, he met Lila Monroe by the river. The rain had finally stopped, replaced by a pale stretch of sunlight that glinted off the water. Ducks drifted near the bank, unbothered by the world beyond their narrow concerns. Lila sat on a wooden bench, hands folded loosely in her lap. She looked different now, not transformed, not suddenly healed, but present in her body in a way she hadn't been before. She wore a light jacket, her hair pulled back simply, no longer tight with anxiety. There were shadows under her eyes, but they looked earned rather than inflicted. Rook settled at Ethan's feet as they sat beside her. Lila smiled down at him and reached out, resting her hand gently on his head. He accepted the touch without hesitation, leaning into it just slightly. "I slept through the night," she said. "All the way through." Ethan nodded. "That matters." She looked out at the river. "They said the charges will stick, that he won't be able to come near me." "He won't," Ethan said. He didn't add if the system works. This wasn't the moment for it. Lila breathed in slowly, then out. "I keep waiting for the feeling to change, like I'm supposed to feel relieved all the time, or happy." "You don't have to," Ethan said. "You just have to feel safe enough to notice what's next." She considered that, then smiled faintly. "I think I can do that." Over the following weeks, life reassembled itself in smaller pieces. Lila didn't return to the flower stall at Burnside, not yet. Instead, she took a temporary position at a small greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, owned by an older couple who asked few questions and gave her space. She worked with soil and seedlings, her hands busy, her days structured by growth rather than fear. She started therapy. She showed up even when it was hard. Maya watched her closely at first, then loosened her grip when she saw her sister standing taller on her own. Ethan returned to his routines: work at the warehouse, evenings with Rook, long walks through neighborhoods that felt less hostile now. He repaired the lock on his door, replaced the splintered frame, but left the marks visible beneath fresh paint. He didn't want to forget how close things had come. One afternoon, Marion Wells called him into her office. "I'm expanding a program," Marion said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Support and safety training for survivors who don't trust systems yet. People who need something practical, grounded." Ethan glanced at the papers. "And you want me?" "I want your experience," Marion said, "and your restraint. Not everyone with your background has both." Ethan hesitated. He thought of the badge he no longer wore, the line he'd crossed, and the cost of it. "I'm not law enforcement anymore," he said. Marion smiled slightly. "Exactly." Ethan agreed to try. The first session was small, 3 people, folding chairs in a community center room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Ethan didn't lecture, he didn't perform. He talked about awareness, about choices, about how fear could be acknowledged without letting it drive every decision. Rook lay at his side, calm and steady, a quiet presence that seemed to ground the room. People listened. Sometime later, Lila came to one of the sessions, not as a participant, but to observe. She sat in the back, arms crossed loosely, watching Ethan speak in a way she hadn't seen before. He wasn't guarded. He wasn't distant. He was precise, careful, present. Afterward, she waited until the room cleared. "You're good at this," she said. Ethan shrugged. "It's easier when the goal is clear." She smiled. "You helped me remember that clarity exists." They walked outside together. Rook followed, tail swaying gently. "I'm thinking about opening a small shop," Lila said as they stood in the afternoon light. "Not at the market. Somewhere quieter. Plants, arrangements, classes maybe." "That sounds like you," Ethan said. She hesitated, then met his gaze. "I don't want to build my life around what happened, but I don't want to pretend it didn't shape me either." "You don't have to," Ethan replied. "You get to decide what stays." Months passed. Grant Halverson remained where he belonged, tangled in court dates, stripped of the control he had once relied on, Marcus Vale took a plea deal and disappeared from the city. The noise faded. On a mild spring afternoon, Lila opened the doors to her shop. It was small, tucked along a quiet street near the river, sunlight pouring through wide windows. The space smelled of earth and leaves, of fresh beginnings. Simple arrangements lined wooden shelves. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, Monroe Botanical. Ethan arrived late, standing near the back, watching as people drifted in and out. Lila moved through the space easily, greeting customers, answering questions, laughing when someone spilled soil on the floor. She caught his eye across the room and smiled. Rook lay near the door, content, greeting strangers with a calm dignity that made people pause and lower their voices instinctively. When the crowd thinned, Lila walked over. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," Ethan replied. She glanced at Rook. "He looks happy." "He is," Ethan said. "So am I." They stood there for a moment, not touching, not rushing to define anything. They didn't need to. Outside, the river moved steadily past, indifferent to the struggles it had witnessed, carrying the city forward. Some endings didn't announce themselves. They arrived quietly, in the space left behind when fear finally loosened its grip. And what remained was enough. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a stranger who refuses to look away, through a loyal animal who stands guard without fear, or through a moment when God places the right person in the right place at the right time. This story is not just about rescue. It's about the truth that no pain is invisible to God. Every tear you cry in silence, every night you survive when no one sees, He sees, and He remembers. In our daily lives, we may never wear a uniform or stop violence in the street, but we all have moments where we can choose compassion over indifference, courage over comfort, and kindness over silence. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. We would love to pray for you. And if you believe that no child, no woman, and no animal should ever face fear alone, please subscribe to this channel so these stories can reach more souls who are waiting for light. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He place a shield around your home, your heart, and your future. And may He use you, in big ways or small, to become someone else's quiet miracle. Amen.